Hey, what's up, guys? It's Bakes here for day number 7 of my 31 Days of Horror. Finally through a week of October, so hopefully we can keep this momentum going for the rest of the month. Today's movie is actually one that I spoke about not too long ago. It's a movie I've seen before. I think I pulled it out on my Shelf by Shelf series, and I think I actually said to you guys it would be an interesting one to rewatch, so here we are. Today's movie is from 2020, and it's titled Antebellum. Now, I'm going to keep the description for this movie sort of short and sharp. I think this movie works best when you just sort of go into it blindly and, go along for the ride. So, this movie, to keep it, as I said, short and sharp, it's sort of a racist situation, this Confederate camp. They've got these black people held as slaves doing, the typical slave work that you hear from back in the time, picking cotton, just terrible shit, it's really fucked up. And this movie has a situation with a bit of time jumping as well. I'm really just going to leave it there because I do not really want to give too much else away. So yeah, let's get into my thoughts of 2020's Antebellum. Now, this has become a little bit of a pattern with the last few movies that we've watched in this 31 Days of Horror series. But again, this movie's probably a little bit more of a psychological thriller / even drama over a straight up horror movie. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not like there is nothing horrific in this movie. The whole situation is really horrific. But again, it's probably a bit more of a psychological thriller / drama. Now, with the drama, this movie is also pretty emotional. The whole situation that these characters are put in, as we've spoken about, it's really brutal. So you really feel for these characters. You cringe, you get frustrated watching it. So a lot of emotion comes out watching this movie, of course. I guess to not beat around the bush, this movie is racist as fuck, and I don't mean that by like the director or the people making the movie are racist, but the whole situation going on in this movie. So I guess trigger warning to some people, but yeah, the whole situation in this movie is racist as fuck. It's really brutal. It's physically, emotionally, mentally brutal. But then even like there's parts in this movie where it's small subtle things, and it reminds me of Get Out, where like characters almost don't even know they're being racist. Like, there are characters that are just straight up racist and say some things to get under people's skin, and you're like, fuck, you can't say that. But like in Get Out, when Chris and his girlfriend go to that house party and everyone's there and they're asking Chris questions about being black, it's like they don't even know they're being racist, which is almost like worse, because it's like it's so cemented in your head that the things that you're saying you think are okay. It's fucked up. But yeah, just to make everyone aware, this movie is pretty racist, so I guess trigger warning to people, because this can be a really uncomfortable watch. Now, I didn't deliberately bring up the topic of Get Out before, but to continue on from that, I've heard a lot of people say, and I'm guessing people that haven't seen this movie, just presume that this movie jumped on the back of Get Out's hype and success and sort of ride that wave. I do think it definitely was inspired by Get Out to do this horror / thriller twist on racial commentary, but I do think this movie is very much its own thing. So if you're just feeling like it's going to be a very similar story or a little bit of a twist on Get Out, you will be wrong. The biggest twist that it does is the movie's twist. It actually does the reveal of the twist halfway through the film. I won't spoil it, but I think that twist is actually pretty interesting. And this obviously, as I said, wasn't a first time watch. So the fact that, I'm watching this again for second, third time, something like that, I actually found the twist to be kind of obvious. And as I said, it's probably because I have seen the movie before. But they do plant lots of seeds in the build up to sort of hint at what the twist is, and it's actually really well executed, and I think that is something that this movie does really well. Now, I have shown this movie a lot of praise so far, but by all means, Antebellum isn't perfect, and I guess I'll get into a few of my negatives now. The first thing is, there are a few moments in this movie that are just thrown in to, I guess, amp up the horror elements, and I feel like they're kind of unnecessary and sort of take away from the movie, if anything, because what works for this movie in its horror is its realism and how brutal it is. And I guess an example I can use, I'm trying not to spoil anything, but there's this creepy girl at the end of the movie that confronts our main character, And it just kind of feels like, oh, here's a creepy girl horror trope thrown in there to amp up the horror. It feels unnecessary. It's just like, you've got something working for you, which is the realism. Keep that momentum going, you know? There are a few moments like that where they just throw in typical horror tropes. I feel like if they reeled it back a bit, it'd be a bit cleaner. Also, the twist in this movie, as I said, it's thrown right in the middle. I'm trying not to spoil anything. It's got a little bit to do with time jumping, but it can be a little bit jarring, especially for a first time watch. I remember watching this movie for the first time, and it took me back a little bit. I'm like, "Oh, what's going on?" And it can be a little bit clunky. Even now, as I said, I've seen this movie before, and I knew what the twist was, but it can still be a little bit clunky with its execution, and it's hard to sort of get your head around at parts, so I feel like they could have cleaned that up a little bit. My next negative, I guess, is a little bit nitpicky, but our main character has a best friend sort of sidekick set in sort of the modern timeline. I'm trying not to spoil anything again. But I kind of find her character to be a little bit annoying. She's set up to be the comic relief, and she does have moments where she says some pretty funny stuff, but I feel like she's the type of character to say, "Oh, I'm not rude, I'm just blunt." It's like, nah, you're rude. Like, there was so many moments where I'm just like, oh my god, this is like cringe to watch. Like, there's a part where they're at a restaurant, and she starts complaining about the table, and she points out where she actually wants to sit, and then she starts grilling this guy who was trying to hit her up, and yeah, I just found her character to be a little bit annoying. I know that's a bit nitpicky, but yeah, there's some parts in this movie where I'm like, oh, this chick is really starting to fucking annoy me. But yeah, they're just a few of my negatives in this one. As I said, it's not a perfect film, but overall, kind of solid. So to sum up my thoughts of Antebellum, this movie is pretty solid in my opinion. By all means, it's not perfect, but a pretty good watch overall. This movie is like underratingly brutal. Like, when people talk about brutal movies, this is definitely one that I've never heard brought up with people. But I think it's so brutal because it's just so real. It's not your typical horror brutal like a film like Saw or Martyrs or whatever. It's just brutal because of how real it is, obviously. A big part of our history in this world, and with slavery and racism still goes on to this day, but a lot of that is where the brutality comes from. As I said, the twist is actually pretty interesting, and I think overall it's well done. As I said in my negatives, it is a little bit clunky and can be a little bit jarring to get your head around, especially for a first time watch. It could be cleaned up a little bit, but the twist is interesting and I do enjoy it. Yeah, overall, this movie, I see a lot of people, sort of skip over this one and they're not too sure about checking it out, but I would recommend it. I'm going to give Antebellum from 2020 a 7.5. Yeah, I'm happy I actually rewatched this one. I probably liked it more this time around. So again, for those people who are skipping over this movie and they're not too sure about it, they're like, I don't know, it doesn't really sound like my thing. It might not be, but I do recommend this movie. It's definitely watchable. 7.5, as I said, I enjoyed it more this time around. A kind of longer movie. It's been like 3 or 4 movies in a row that sort of have a longer runtime in this 31 Days of Horror challenge. So maybe day number 8, I'll pick something a little bit shorter because I'm sort of getting burnt out of these long movies. But either way, day 7 out of the way. I'll see you tomorrow for day number 8. Thanks, guys.